Welcome to How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. In this podcast, we dive into compassionate leadership in today's fast-paced business environment. With our experience and insights, we'll help you lead with heart while securing your career. Join us for engaging conversations and practical advice to elevate your leadership skills and make a real difference. I'm your host, Chris Olerking, a Fortune 100 IT leader, alongside Roberto Torres, a seasoned startup engineering leader. Today, we will discuss how we strive to be humane leaders. Hey, Roberto, how you doing?
Good morning, Chris. I'm fine. How about you?
Good, good. It's a good day, and it's an interesting topic, career paths and how people get to where they are in their careers. Obviously, everybody has a different path, but I know from our conversations, we have both strived to be humane leaders. How did you kind of develop your path into doing your best to be a humane leader?
Well, uh, at first, I had really bad experiences in my work life. You know, when I was an IC, and I was maybe a junior engineer, I had really bad experiences, and with those bad experiences, instead of sticking with that kind of behavior from my bosses, I stick with my values because, you know, uh, I, my dad, I admire my dad. So I took some things from my dad and I added it into my own set of values. And I did the same with my grandparent, with my granddad. And what happened was, at first, when I began working, excuse me, at a big bank. We were like here in Mexico, like 15,000 employees, and I was in engineering. We were like 200 people, and I was assigned to a boss, excuse me, to a department. And this department had this boss, not a leader. And I remember well one time that I was going out. I had a volleyball training. It was like 6 o'clock, and I decided to go with my leader between calls and say, "Hey, see you tomorrow." And he said to me, "Why are you leaving?" Because I have a ballroom training. It's 30 minutes away. No, but I haven't left. If I haven't left, you cannot go. It was kind of shocking. Why? And he told me, because my boss, when I began working, did the same to me. And it was like, a between quotes, a culture of doing this. And I said, no, I have this and I have to leave. But the thing is, regardless of this example, it was I became a humiliated when certain scenarios and certain situations didn't stick with my mind, with what I thought it was the good stuff to do instead of the bad things. So when I talk about my dad or my grandparent, uh, it was the way they treated me with respect, with nurturing, to make my own decisions and not to do bad stuff. So that's why I began having myself to become a humane leader.
Yeah, I think it can absolutely start when you're very young. I mean, I have memories of my parents versus other friends' parents. And my parents were very absolutely nurturing, but would do corrections, right? No, you're
Oh,
doing that or that was wrong. But when I think back and I compare to my friends' parents to my parents almost never yelled at me. They would correct me or tell me I was wrong, or maybe I did something and I needed to be punished, I get grounded or whatever. But they never yelled the correction. I had friends' parents who every correction, everything they did bad was screaming and bad kid and just like horrifying to me. And then when I was in the business world, whenever I saw a boss that was like that, scream and scream for the correction versus, look, Roberto, that isn't quite how we do things here. And even in your scenario of leaving early, if you address it and have a discussion about it and say, okay, we'll go this time, but realize the culture of this company is to work 12-hour days, even though the employment contract is for 8. You can have a calm and rational discussion about it versus a screaming thing. And so for me, as I developed my leadership skills, I've always looked to emulate who do I think is doing it right and observe and see who's doing it wrong. And okay, I don't want to do that, and I do want to do this. Because look at the good results this person's getting with that technique, whatever it is. I'll just use the easy one of screaming versus calmly discussing. But you start to emulate those things and be very observant. And I think that's one of the most important things in developing into being a humane leader is your powers of observation. Observe what others are doing. Observe the outcomes of that. Is it successful? Is it not? I mean, screaming can be very effective in the short term, like in the next 5 minutes. But in the long run, the people who are getting screamed at, they don't want to work there. They don't want to give an extra 10% when it's needed in an urgent crisis. They want to leave. They want to quit. They want to get to a different boss. So I too, I think, observation from a very young age through my career is a big part of how I want to try and be a humane leader.
Yeah. One thing to add to what your parents gave to you as well as my parents was guidance. I don't know you, but my parents told me, okay, you did this, it was wrong, but what you could have done was maybe going to with this path or doing this action, but there were a little amount of time they told me what to do. They allowed me to fail and they allowed me to learn from that, and they gave me guidance. I was never alone, even though I made these mistakes and I learned from that. They never let me alone, and that was something really good for myself, because yes, I learned. I know that I could go with my parents and told them, and with that same train of thought, I had some leaders, some humane leaders that I really, really liked. Back then we have an 8 to 5 work hours. And I remember well that I was at a department. We were 3 engineers and our manager. And some managers come and go as the one that I previously talked about. But there were certain things that we didn't like. One manager told us, okay, guys, I'm required for you to give me this report Monday at first hour. Say, but it is 4:55. Well, yes, you can do it. And he left, and we saw each other and said, oh my God, what are we going to do? So the three of us began working. We had maybe we had something Friday night. Some of us got into Saturday to the office to work because we didn't have laptops. There was nothing like that. And we began working. And when we arrived on Monday, we came to that boss and say, hey, here is the report. And he grabbed it and said, okay, thank you. And he put it on somewhere else, but he didn't require it. And, it made us really bad that we gave part of our weekend to a guy who didn't care about us. He wasn't not compassionate. He wasn't not a humane leader, but he was a bad boss because he could have done. He could have told us this has high priority, but I know that it goes in the middle the weekend. Maybe you could work it on a Monday, and I will maybe talk to the managers. No, he didn't. And just to end this, one of my friends, he went to our boss at the at noon, and he tell, hey Pepe, what's going on? What about this report? Uh, no, it had a low priority, but thank you guys for working on that. So we felt really bad about that.
Yeah, certainly those bad examples probably stick in our minds more than the good examples. I mean, when you have a bad experience, you can learn a lot from a bad experience because you will remember that for a very, very long time. Although I have plenty of very good experiences that I remember. My very first boss, as in my professional career, Dennis was my first boss, and just an incredible man. If I were to describe him in a single word as a leader, mentor is the word I would use to describe him. And he approached all of his leadership things, in my opinion, my observations of his style, how he did things throughout his whole career. And I knew him for years after he wasn't my boss. Um, is he mentored people. And I've watched on LinkedIn and stuff too, where other people that no longer work for the company comment on his profile, that Dennis was such a great mentor. And so sometimes those kinds of role models make you realize that, look, Dennis was my boss. He was my leader. And to be honest with you, I don't think he really wanted to be a people manager. But when they hired me, they made me report to Dennis. And he was an incredible mentor, giving me the opportunities, like you said, to learn, fail. He'd put in guardrails to make sure things didn't get too far out of whack that I'd get in trouble. But he mentored me. He was training to be a leader, even though I don't know what he really was intending to do in terms of turning me into a humane leader. But that's what it was, because he was compassionate. He never raised his voice. If I had to do something special and it had to be over the weekend, he was the first one to say, hey, you know what? Why don't you take next Friday off? Don't mark it as vacation. This was back before unlimited vacation became a thing, right? You had a fixed number of days. He's like, look, you worked over the weekend. Why don't you take next Friday off? The weather's supposed to be great. Don't mark it down as vacation. I'll cover. I'll tell them you're off doing something. I mean, that's the kind of leader that you remember and you say, wow, when there's some special event like, hey, some weekend hours are required, you cover for those people, do something special for them. And certainly if I had to do that report and my leader was Dennis, he would immediately have taken it, and almost like how the Japanese, right? Take it and read it and study it and say, thank you. And I'm going to look at this right now. Even though maybe he didn't need it right then, that's what he would have done, because that's what a good mentor does, and says, oh, thank you for this. I'm going to take care of this right now. Thanks. I got to study it. Let me close my door. So even if he couldn't sit there and look at it for the next hour, he probably would have closed the door and set it down and done some other priority, but realizing, oh my God, they put in the extra effort, got this done, because that's what a good humane leader does. He respects that extra effort that you put in and makes you feel good about it, even though maybe the top boss who told him at 4:55 he needed it Monday at 9 a.m. and it's the top boss above him that's the problem. Who knows, right? But a good humane leader makes the team feel good about what they produced. A bad boss discounts it.
Yeah, and that's something that we as ICs, managers, whatever, we have to recognize those people who provide value to ourselves and themselves as well, from the ones who are only thinking about themselves. So, we had to emulate. And with that in mind, you spoke about Dennis. I had to spoke about the first true humane leader that I had, which his name was Pablo Riedel. And he was working at the same bank that I was working, and he was he was my latest manager before I left to another company. But this guy was awesome. He was a true coherent person who said something and got actions that supported that words, that phrase. And for that, let me talk to you about one time he got into a fight. you know what? One of the worst things that I remember about the bank that we had to go to a suit on a daily basis and a tie that I really hated. But regardless of that, he told us the three guys, the three engineers, we rise. Was a mid, and there were a guy that was a mid, and another was a senior. Pablo told us one day at 4 p.m. Friday, guys, I'm really sorry. I received this. We had to work on this. If we do it today, we could have the whole waiting for us, but we had to work it. Are you up to the challenge? And, we have too many times that people said this to us. So we said, yes, we weren't convinced of his words because we had too many bad experiences before. So instead of say yes, man, okay, we're going to do it. So we we talked between each other and we began coding. But suddenly at 7 p.m., he left. At 7 p.m., he got to the office. He got I think it was like two or three pizzas, big pizzas, the ones that had meatballs and
The
the greasy,
specials.
yes, this greasy stuff that would go through your veins, but it will take you, it will awake you. And then we were shocked and surprised. Pablo, what are you doing here? Hey, what am I doing? I'm part of this team. So I'm here to be with you. I know that you haven't got dinner, so I bought this. He bought sodas, and he ate with us. And he began talking to us as humane people. Instead of being my manager and us, he was talking to us, and we were at first shocked. We were happy, and as soon as we began having dinner and talking with him, and he was inquiring about, hey, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have kids? Hey, whatever. We were open ourselves. And after we had dinner, he said to us, okay, I'm your QA guy. Okay, so you tell me when to do this, what to test. I'll be there in my office. His office were away from our side, but he was a coherent guy. And when he left to his office, we talked to each other and say, "Hey, I like this dude." He was so fond of making us better, and we stayed with this guy for 1 year, and he was the best uh, leader that we had. And from that moment, I said to this guy, so to myself, I don't recall, but I said, I want to be like this guy. When I be in a manager position, I want to be like that guy. So I grabbed some things from here. I know knowledge, and I recognize his humility, but I chose which parts I wanted to print into my DNA. So
Absolutely. I mean, those good examples can really help you see what techniques work and what the outcomes are of doing that. That you guys were more enthusiastic, even though it's terrible to have to work on a Friday night, you're more enthusiastic about it because he's in it with you to help you be successful. And I think, that you guys then judged him positively. I think the other thing a humane leader needs to realize, you may do those exact same techniques, doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to judge you humanely. Through our company system of performance reviews and stuff, we had it such that no matter how many the hierarchy is, the bosses could get feedback for you. And so when during your performance review, the boss could read anonymous feedback. Well, one person said this about Roberto and another person said this, and here's some positive comments and here's some not so positive comments about your leadership. And a humane leader not only learns to emulate the successful leaders, but also learns to take feedback and realize that even though you are trying to be a humane leader, you're listening to our podcasts and you're trying the techniques, doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, because one of those team members may have had a first date that they were really excited for Friday night, and now it got canceled, and gets no second chance at that second, at a first date. They're just not, you're never going to be a humane leader in their eyes. And sometimes you have to realize you just can't be the perfect humane leader for everybody all the time. Do the best you can. Try and learn techniques from successful people. Listen to feedback. So you're going to get some negative feedback on, humane leadership topics, and try and determine, is there something you can do about it, or is it that, look, you know what, I had to do this inhumane thing. I had to make the team work on Friday night. I just had no choice. The leadership above me said they needed this, and it needs to be working Saturday morning. Guess what? That means we're working Friday night, and I don't have control over that kind of a thing. Well, you're not going to get positive feedback on that. You're just not. No matter
Yeah.
how humane you are. It's great you brought pizzas. It's great you're in helping the team. Some of the team still may not be satisfied with it. And that's part of being a humane leader too, is realizing sometimes you can't please everybody.
Yeah, the first thing for anybody to become a humane leader is that they have to ask themselves, do I want to become a humane leader? If, let me tell you, there are three answers. Yes, okay. What are you going to do besides listen to this podcast? And the second one, you have to do more things. But the other two answer is, if you doubt or you say no, it's going to be really difficult for you to become a humane leader, because this is something that comes from your soul. This is something that doesn't come from a job offer. It doesn't come from an email. It has to come from you, from within, because it is our parents, you know,
Yep.
they they wanted to their kids to become better, to explore. This is something like I have told a friend of mine about my son. Uh, what I did to my son was to provide him with a foundation. In this foundation are roots, and this in these roots are the values that I'm very fond of, and the ones that I wanted to provide to him. And with that, he with those roots, he had another thing, which was the sky. Because have done he could do anything that he wants to do it based on those rules. So it happens the same with as humane leader, as I see it. This is a mix between my parents, myself, and everything. But when I talk with some of my peers, my or my reports, what I do is to give them this foundation. You know, to talk with them about my values. And I say, if you want to become a humane leader, don't copy paste my values. Stick with your own. But have this foundation, and the sky is the limit. You could go everywhere. And if you find out that you have to do something bad, you will stick to your foundation, to those values, to those rules, and make the better decision. You will do it or not. But that's how I see a humane leader uh, teaching other people to become humane leaders. So I'll go with that instance, with that example of doing the things that have to be done correctly or good.
Right. Yeah. You have to be humane about what you have to do. I mean, your leadership example of, hey, we got to work on a Friday night, but he's there supporting you. In my company, we went through lots of layoffs, and frequently that's bad news. I don't know any leader who thinks doing a layoff is great, but you can try and be humane about it. And, there were cases where I would get told, hey, you're laying this person off tomorrow. Just told. I didn't get to participate in decision making, or who out of the team should get laid off, or hey, we can't survive with getting rid of anybody. It would just be this person, go on Monday, you're going to follow this, or Thursday, you're going to follow this script, and tell them that Friday's their last day, and this is exactly what you're going to do. And you get 24, maybe 48 hours notice, and that's it. It's really hard to be humane when you have to let someone go. And so even a humane leader tries to be as compassionate about it, realize how the other person's going to feel when you give them this bad work, whether it's working on a Friday night or you're getting laid off. And you work with them to say, look, this is the situation. Help them understand what the benefits are of the layoff. You're going to get severance and you get health care, and that's as humane as you're allowed to be, because being from a big corporation, there's a very tight script that you, the leader, has to give. You can't deviate from it. It's pre-written. But you can be humane about it, right? You can be compassionate and look at the person and say, look, there is healthcare benefits. You can try and apply for other jobs that are still open within the company during this severance period. You can still be a compassionate leader with really bad news, but it's the kinds of things that we've talked about before. Partake in the discussion with the person, realize how they're feeling in it, that they're, that the impact this is going to have on them, whether it's a Friday night working late or whether it's as traumatic as a layoff, and try and be supportive for what that person needs to go through. And that's what a humane leader does, whether it's good news you're giving a team, sort of bad news, or really bad news. Be that humane leader and think about how would you want to be treated if you were in that exact same situation. And unfortunately, there are leaders who just never feel that that's necessary. They don't feel the need to be a humane leader because they want to climb the ladder as fast as possible, and the people they're picking to emulate, probably not humane leaders usually, because usually if you're trying to climb the ladder super fast, it's at the expense of others. And I think a humane leader looks at succeeding and getting promoted because the tide is lifting all boats, and you're competing. To be a leader is a competition. There's a pyramid, but you're doing it in a humane way. And many other leaders do it by backstabbing and beating their team up and punishing them and pounding on them. And it works in the short run and gets them up the ladder quickly, but it's not a good long-term strategy. And that's why I support our humane, discussions so much, as I think that this is the best way. I'm still a capitalist. I still believe in promotions and fighting for promotions, but I think you can do it humanely. And I really want to encourage people to try those approaches and be a humane leader.
Yeah, very thoughtful of you, and I totally get. And one thing that I had to mention is that I had very few leaders. I had too many bosses, but I had a few leaders, and that's because they are humane leaders, and uh, they have given me something that I cherish, that I have put it in myself. And I had too many bosses, which uh, I don't take the lessons they gave me, but I have recognized what I don't want to be, what I don't recognize as something to cherish. And just to before I will wrap up, I think that recognition has to be important. Pablo Riedel was a humane leader to me, and Pedro Vera was also a humane leader to me. Some time I'm going to talk about them. Pablo was 12 years older than me, and Pedro was 21 years younger than me. And regardless of the age, you can learn a lot of stuff from people, from humane leaders.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. So awesome. With this, we could do the wrap up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. We hope our insights help you become a smarter and more strategic leader. Apply today's lessons to see the positive impact on your team and career. Catch all our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and YouTube. Join us next week as we discuss something trendy in the leadership world. Until then, stay humane, stay successful. See you later, Roberto.
Bye, Chris.